You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got major news here. It looks like Donald Trump cannot find a company willing to underwrite his $500 million judgment to the court in that New York fraud case. What happened here?
So, Brian, we're seeing now the sort of final stages of the financial demise of Donald Trump, and it's not being greatly exaggerated. So, this is his last ditch effort to try to convince an appellate court in New York to not make him either pay the full amount of the $500 million money judgment that was entered against him in his New York civil fraud trial, or put up a bond securing the full amount. He's desperately begging the court to not have to do that in order to appeal the case. The problem is, it looks like there's not even a procedure in New York State under the laws applicable to this issue for the appellate court to sort of do this favor for him. And in fact, in this brand new court filing from Donald Trump, his lawyers say, listen, we recognize that Attorney General Letitia James says the appellate court in New York doesn't even have the lawful authority to do what we are asking it to do, to kind of save us from financial ruin, but we're asking them to do it anyway. And not to turn this into a legal breakdown law school class, Brian, but when you read through, this is a 4,919 page filing, albeit most of it is a bunch of attachments, some of which are unnecessary. But when you dig into the body of this court filing, Donald Trump cites federal case law supporting his proposition that the appellate court can do this if it wants. Here's the problem. He's in New York State court, and he can't come up with any New York State court cases. So what's going on in this legal filing, perhaps not surprisingly, is a little bit of bait and switch. That's why I say, Brian, it looks like we are in the final stages of the financial ruin of Donald Trump.
Which raises the obvious question here. What happens in the event that Donald Trump can't get the money?
That's easy. Letitia James uses the lawful procedures of New York to start seizing his stuff, his properties, his real estate holdings, any liquid assets he might have. You know, it's an open question as to how much cash on hand he has. I'm betting it's almost zero. Maybe that's why he had to try to commandeer the RNC, because he needs to find a new pot of money to, pay his massive legal fees and his money judgments. But the reality is, it's not all that unusual for once a civil case has been resolved by a jury and one party loses and is ordered to pay the other party the damages, it's not that unusual for the winning party to get to start seizing the assets of the losing party to satisfy the money judgment. The only thing unusual here is the amount, but it's really interesting. If you read through the first 20 pages or so of this court filing, it's clear that nobody will do business with Donald Trump. He says, look, we went to 30 surety companies. We went to the largest insurer in the world, and nobody will grant us a bond. He tries to play it off. There's so much bait and switch going on in this new court filing. He tries to say, well, that's because so many of these companies won't accept real estate, non-liquid assets as collateral. But then later on in his own court filing, he says, well, sure, there are a number of insurance companies who don't require liquid assets. So he's kind of all over the map. But what's clear, Brian, is he ain't no billionaire. Think about this. Elena Haba, his lead lawyer, who went down in flames in the New York civil fraud trial, together with his other lawyer, Christopher Kise. I think they may be co-leads. Recently, she gave an interview. She said Donald Trump is worth $14 billion. Think about that representation. That would mean that this $500 million judgment that he can't even secure so he can appeal his case represents 1/28th of his asserted value. And so if Elena Haba was being accurate and truthful, I would think insurance companies would be beating down Donald Trump's door, because they would say, that's just 1/28th of the entire value of your assets. we're happy to do business with you because insurers get about 2% of the amount that they are guaranteeing or
Right.
putting up a bond for in commissions. So they're going to make a whole big chunk of change off Donald Trump. Problem is, he ain't worth no $14 billion. He may not be worth $14 million at this point. So we are really seeing the end of the financial road for Donald Trump.
And all the while, is he still incurring interest on this amount, which kind of I believe would amount to like $100,000 per day?
Every minute of every day, interest is accruing, it's piling up. And, really all it comes down to now, Brian, in my opinion, is how much of Donald Trump's real estate holdings will Attorney General James have to seize in order to satisfy the entire money judgment?
And why might the real estate assets not be adequate collateral for Letitia James?
Probably because of the value of the real estate assets. When I say value, I'm talking about two things. One, it has to be unencumbered. What does that mean? There can't be these big old mortgages that are encumbering the value of the real estate assets. That's one. Two, what are his real estate assets even worth? And there is a shining example of how Donald Trump continues to overinflate the value of his real estate holdings. I would like to say I was surprised to see this in a new court filing, but I guess I'm really not all that surprised. Let me read it first and then let's talk about it. He says right up front on page 2, because he can't help himself, he says that the judge in the New York civil fraud trial, quote, ridiculously valued Mar-a-Lago as being worth between 18 million and 27.6 million dollars, understanding that its actual value was about is about 50 to 100 times that. So it's worth billions and billions and billions of dollars, and yet
Right.
no insurance company will use it as collateral to secure a bond. All of this. And Brian, I know Donald Trump can't give up the con. I know he can't give up the lie. But to see him to continue to put these lies into court filings in a case where he has to pay a massive money judgment because he fraudulently overvalued the assets that he had is just mind boggling. And let's never stop looking at this against the backdrop of the fact that the Trump organization, his company, right? It bears his name. He ruled it with an iron fist. That company was found guilty in a criminal trial of 17 counts of being involved in a first degree criminal fraud scheme over the course of 15 years. I mean, the fact that Donald Trump continues to lie both in and out of court about the value of his assets is just, it's mind boggling.
And so, what are next steps now in terms of whether or not the judge is going to allow for any of these completely baseless exceptions to his being able to pay?
So I think, Brian, the next step is Donald Trump can still file an appeal of the judgment in the civil fraud case that he lost. However, he's going to have to either deposit the full amount of the judgment, more than $500 million, into the court's escrow account. It's pretty clear based on this pleading he doesn't have it, or put up a bond to secure the full amount. And in this court filing, he said, I can't do that. We have tried and nobody will do business with us. Nobody will issue a bond for the full amount. But he can still file his appeal. But Tish James gets to start seizing his stuff promptly while the appeal is pending in the appellate courts of New York. That's it. So I do believe, if I was betting my $1, which is my betting limit, I would put it on Tish James now, employing the procedures of the courts of New York to begin seizing his properties.
All right. Well, it'll be nice to see when the day comes where they start peeling the letters off of Trump Tower and replacing them with whatever new branding that place has. Obviously, we'll stay on top of this as soon as we have any updates in terms of whether or not Donald Trump is able to figure out how to pay this settlement here. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.